If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did. If you're like me,
that's not supposed to happen. Well, that's what does happen when you do things the low-tech way and aren't sufficiently careful. Let me make a couple adjustments on my other screen. And today's topic is kind of sort of back to Blender in a way. And so there's a few things I wanted to talk about today in the process of just maybe getting some work done, and also had some questions for you guys in terms of what you might find helpful resource-wise in terms of learning how to do some of the things that we do here. Morning, Maria. I like that. Hi, all. You're the only one here. Well, that is how it goes. So the shot I was working on last night, by the way, which was I would call it a hybrid shot between Blender and Krita. And I mentioned yesterday that I was kind of seeing the light here where this might be a real, very workable flow. The ongoing challenge with software has really been to find ways to work around stuff that seems kind of dumb. Like a good example would be, hey Darren, a good example would be like the issue we've all talked about several times in Tahoma, where it kind of doesn't know if you're really trying to draw those new ink lines that are being drawn over some old ink lines. Just stuff like that. I mean, like, all these tools have little quirks about them that can become quite annoying at times. And so I suggested last night that one of the things that, because I don't consider myself the greatest in the world at drawing, one of the things that I thought might be maybe a more viable approach to what I'm doing would be to do the pencil test and the ink in Blender, where the sculpting tools are just seamlessly integrated with the process of drawing. I'm obviously, over the last few days, we saw how you can use lattices and things like that to add secondary animation, much like the plastic tool works in OpenTunes or Tahoma 2D. But without a doubt, those tools in Blender are much easier to control, let's put it that way. So if it's quick and dirty stuff in Tahoma, it's great. It's quick, it's pretty easy. There's more power in Blender, arguably in exchange for a little more setup time. And that usually is the trade-off. What we don't have is any other application than Blender that allows seamless integration of sort of, I would say, sculpting and drawing, where you can just do the two together and really dial in your art. You come close with Krita with the liquify tool, but we've already gone through in the past how it's kind of hard to bend things, the way you can with bones, let's say. It's hard to bend things. You can use the twist operator with the liquify tool, but it doesn't really work that well. So sometimes you can kind of make it work, but it's a clunk, So in terms of the workflow of just drawing and doing pencil tests in ink, there's no question that I would say that Blender kind of beats, out of the three, Blender wins. Tahoma's close at just the pencil test stage. But again, if you're trying to really work fast, and especially if you're trying to integrate inking with pencil test, then you run into some things that make it a little challenging or difficult, let's just say. But the more I played around with it, both on the laptop and then on the hot machine, which we're on right now, I found that this workflow is pretty nice. I mean, I seem to be able to do what I'm trying to do unimpeded pretty efficiently, and it's fun. It's turning out to be efficient, effective, and enjoyable. So there's 3 words that start with E, so we will alliterate. Effective, efficient, and enjoyable. And that was the process that kind of led us to this shot here. So I struggled obviously with Blender 2.81 for a few days. But then when we came around to this shot, it all came together pretty quickly. So it was pencil tested and inked in Blender, but then I just brought the image sequence into here, into Krita for coloring, and then all the secondary stuff, like this shadow, for example. Let's see here. That would be this. Okay, so basically here you have this is a great example of, you know, you've got, you want to have a shadow in there, right? And you want it to be blurred. And so then the question becomes, well, how hard or difficult, you know, well, hard and difficult, same thing, but, you know, can you just do it? Or is it like, well, yeah, you can do it if you sort of jump through this hoop and that hoop and the other. In the case of Tahoma, for example, this would be pretty easy to do. Just add a shadow. With the caveat that if you want to blur it, you're going to have to do something in the schematic to make it transparent. So in terms of layering effects and lighting effects and things like that, generally I tend to favor Krita. Just because I can quickly, in the layer stack, just kind of do what I want to do, and I don't really have to think about it too hard. So, to kind of wrap up the story on this shot, I added an overlay to put the bricks back in there, and this could do with a little extra painting, actually, because there's some goofy stuff there, but basically it looks fine. At actual size, this is what we would see. So this area in here really needs a little hand painting, but no big deal. I also, here's another example of something that was pretty quick and easy to do in Krita, is I took the background and I just made a duplicate of it and then blurred the copy, and then used the airbrush to just erase the bottom so that it only defocuses at the top. So another good example of something that seems like it would be really simple to do, but oftentimes it's not quite as simple as you thought. I mean, in Blender you could be getting into all kinds of wacky things in the you know, in node-based compositing and whatnot, just to be able to take a stupid image and blur the top of it. You know, to just blur it's pretty easy. To blur just the top of it, you would need a mask to mask out the part. You know what I mean? So you can either do things the easy way or you can do things the hard way. This seems to always be the case, you know. In the case of Monkey, what I actually was able to do here was, if I remember correctly, what I did was I actually pilfered the image sequence from the older version of the shot in Tahoma 2D, and then I just used import animation frames like that to bring it into Krita. Done. With the caveat that I also added a color corrector, and I also added a transformation mask in order to get him positioned in the shot where I wanted him to be. But the point is, getting Monkey in the shot took 5 minutes. It isn't the point isn't about being fast, although sometimes I've had a tendency to fixate on that. It's really not about being fast. It's about being unimpeded. It's about saying to yourself, this is what I want to do. Okay, click, 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 you know, and you just do it. That's my goal. That's what I'm after. I want to just have an unimpeded creative flow. And I don't want the tools to prevent that more than they promote that. And it's really been a mixed bag over the last couple of years with each of the different tools that I use. But as I say, one thing I am noticing is the workflow in Blender. Basically, what am I talking about when I talk about the integration of sculpting and drawing? Well, what I'm saying is I wanna just be loose, right? I just want to draw. Okay, so let's draw Luka, right? So I need to scribble and sketch and find my character, right? I might go to front front view so I can flip it, by the way. Whoops. So I can flip the screen to make sure I'm not getting out of balance. But, kind of put these indicators in there. And then I say, well, maybe something about it isn't quite right, okay? So I jump into sculpting mode and I go, well, okay, because I don't draw that well, right? I just draw okay. So now, but with a little sculpting, I can pound it into shape. And of course, if I was doing ink, I could do the same thing, right? So it's pretty forgiving in the sense that you can sort of seamlessly just do what you're trying to do. You can do the same thing in Krita. For the most part, if you're not moving the lines around too much with the liquify tool, you can do it. And if you do it too much, then of course the lines will start to smear and blur, which is perfectly understandable because it's a pixel-based program. Whereas in Blender, since they're vectors, you never lose any crispness and resolution in your art as a consequence of sculpting. Okay. So I'm just drawing Luka, and I really like that integration of drawing and sculpting together in a single, just pretty seamless operation. Now, one of the questions that occurred to me this morning, and it kind of harkens back to the fact that I said I was going to ask some questions. I was going to ask some questions about educational materials, okay, which would basically be about a Blender, particularly a Blender to Krita animation workflow. Is that something people would want to, pay $12 for or something? Because it would take some effort to create a course like that, which would probably consist, I think, of probably just one pretty lengthy video. That's where, unlike my live streams, I wouldn't be winging it. I'd be really dialing it down to very crisp and clear step-by-step processes so you can kind of see exactly what to do and follow along and that sort of thing. And then the additional bonus, of course, would be access to the Blender files themselves, like the templates that I use and things like that. They always, sort of let me hop into Blender and immediately get to work and be productive without having to do a bunch of housekeeping first, right? So when you go out in the on YouTube and in the internet space and look into Blender, of course everybody is going to report the new features that are available in version 3. Okay? And so I wanted to say something about that because the question has come up, especially in the past when I was using Blender at times on Salt and Light. I would be using version 2.79, which is an extremely stable, extremely mature, the final culmination of the 2.5 series. And then we got into the 2.8 series, which I like 2.81a, but I also keep on my machine 2.93, which is really the end of the 2.8 series. So you had the 2.5 series, which lasted about 10 years. You had the 2.8 series, which I'm going to say it lasted about 4 or 5 years. And now we're into version 3. Okay, so now the point I want to make about this is very simple. People will ask me all the time, if they see me using 2.79, they'll say, well, why aren't you using version 3? Or if I'm using version 2.81a, they'll ask me why I'm not using version 3. Or they'll say, well, why aren't you using 2.93 if you're really married to the 2.8 series? And here's what the reason is. Okay, I want to say this very emphatically. When I rant at Krita, for example, and complain about the things that are kind of wrong-headed maybe in Krita 5, let's say. Okay, the reason those things are important to me is because I'm not just playing here. Okay, I'm doing real work that has to come up to a certain quality standard that of course is evolving and needs to always be improving and yada yada yada. But basically, I'm not just saying, hey, you can do this in Krita. I'm not doing that. I'm not reporting. I'm doing it. Well, the people that are, if you go on YouTube and you find a video that's going to be quite helpful, I mean, this serves a valuable purpose. You can find a video that says, what are the 10 cool features in Blender 3 that you really must know, and you're going to get a list. You go over all the features, or all the features of the grease pencil. What improved between the 2.5 series and 2.8. So you can find people that will report that information to you. It's very, very important to understand, though, that usually, with very few exceptions, the people that are reporting the features that are so cool and amazing in any piece of software, those people are virtually never the people that are actually creating cool work in the software. So what they're doing is they're telling you this is what's possible, or these are the touted new features of the tool. But those people that report that to you, and vis-a-vis those reports, the people who come to me on the chat or whatever and say, how come you're not using this version or that version? Usually, none of those people are people that are actually using those tools at a professional level, let's say. For lack of a better term, let's just throw that word out there and say professional. So what happens is there are amazing features in Blender 3, geometry nodes, for example. There are amazing advancements in the Blender 2.8 series with the grease pencil and the fact that you have a fill tool. So things like that. But what you don't get from the reports is all the little tiny gotchas that really, don't quite work right, or are buggy, or will crash the program. You don't get that in the reports about featureitis. Okay, so when you're really trying to get work done, you become a little more not discerning, but discriminating. You become more discriminating about the tools you use and how you use them, because the truth is that when you go do the deep dive, you simply know more in most cases than the people that are just simply reporting what all the new touted features are. So in the case of Krita, of course, the transform mask and the ability to use interpolated keyframe animation to move things around the screen is awesome. Okay, but consider this little detail about that. Remember, I use this feature all the time, but remember this very important detail. What Krita can do now in version 5, Blender has been able to do for 22 years. OpenToons has been able to do ever since it was released as an open source program. Okay, so there's nothing exciting about that feature other than the fact that it's new to Krita. Well, why would we care about that? We would only care about that if we're really, really obsessed with having a workflow where we can just have that wonderful, magical feeling of having one tool that can do it all. But Hollywood understands there is no one tool that can do it all, and that's why you focus on the practical concerns associated with interoperability of your tools. The common thread across the workflow. I had people on the chat the other day talking about the OCA format, which is an open animation file format that would let you export an animated shot from Krita and import it into Blender. And you'd go, oh my gosh, that's so cool, right? Well, I encourage anyone to try it, because the person who told me you can do that, now I've had people say, well, it seems to work for me. And I have to respect that. For me, I tried that tool, and both sides of it, the export from Krita and the import into Blender, both basically broke, but didn't work. It kind of looked like, I looked at the files that were generated and blah, 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 and it's like, okay, it kind of worked. But in terms of a seamless workflow, it really didn't work. The most seamless thing in terms of interoperability that I've ever done here is take a layer or a group from Krita and just cut and paste it into Tahoma. And that's a really powerful workflow. Like in the real world, that's like huge to be able to do that. Because it works. Is it elegant? Well, I guess it's not as elegant as having all the painting capabilities of Krita in Tahoma. That would probably be better. But, if it takes you all of 5 seconds to get your assets from here to there, is this really a problem, people? So, anyway, why do I say that little diatribe? Well, the reason is because the question I asked myself this morning is there a use case? Is there a justification to actually, if I'm going to do this workflow, which I'm pretty darn sure I am, of doing my pencil testing and my ink, not my paint generally, but just the ink, in Blender so I can have that seamless experience of getting all the animation blocked in. And basically I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to suck it up and suffer the extra time it takes to do a little bit more fill operations on the paint side of things. Okay, that's the choice I've sort of made that I think seems to strike a balance where I pay a small price, but it's not that big of a price, for reasons I won't get into the details of right now. But there's very, very practical workflow considerations that lead you to say, you know what, that's a pretty darn good workflow. So again, the question is there a use case for Blender 2.79? Because if people come on here and see me using 2.79 instead of, you know, well, it's like, God forbid 2.79, let alone 2.81, why the heck aren't you using 3? Well, the reason is there's actually some really, really good reasons why you would actually consider staying in Blender 2.79. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Some of these things are quite small, and if you really spent the time, you could overcome them. Okay, so like one example would be in Blender, you're going to hit Control Tab to switch between Draw Mode, Edit Mode, or Sculpt Mode. Okay, Sculpt Mode being the ability to do this kind of stuff, or Object Mode. Okay, so in Blender 2.8 series, you use the pop-up pie menu to do that. Now you could probably assign a hotkey to maybe, let's say, switch from drawing to sculpting mode. Okay, but let's look at this. How did I do the same thing when I was in Blender? Because remember, if we're talking about basically pencil test and ink and paint and the essential functionality and, let's say, you know, how responsive is the software, what's the quality of the ink lines, can you get the look that you're trying to get, blah, blah, blah. If you have basically parity between, say, Blender 2.79 and 2.81, then the only question that matters has to do with the little tiny things that you do 1,000 times a day that either make it faster or slower, more responsive or not responsive. So number one, right out of the gate, I can tell you that the actual just drawing in Blender 2.79 is more responsive than in any 2.8 series version of Blender. Having said that, 2.81 is second best. 2.93 is palpably worse in terms of your drawing, and you just feel a little bit of a lag because there's more calculating going on, right? And 3 is similar to 2.93. So if you really want to just scribble as fast as you can and have the software be right there, responsive, 2.79 beats any new version of Blender. So if that's not important to you, then it's no big deal. But if it is important to you, then it could be kind of a really big deal. Okay, so I'm drawing another picture of Luka. And okay, so here's another example. In Blender 2.79, I hit the D key to go into drawing mode. Well, here's the dirty little secret that nobody really notices. We are not in drawing mode. There is no drawing mode in Blender 2.79. We're in edit mode. So that means if I hit escape and just lasso things, I'm instantly in edit mode and I can start sculpting. I hit the O key and I'm in proportional editing mode. Did I turn it on or off? I turned it on. So go, and I can actually turn up the influence and I'm instantly in edit mode. Right? Another thing you have in Blender 2.79 that's different is in future versions of Blender, you would hit the A key to select all, and you'd hit the A key. Well, in 2.79, you just hit the A key twice it toggles. Select all, select none. Select all, select none. In other versions of Blender, for reasons that I totally understand, you have two different hotkeys for selecting. You use Alt-A to deselect. Okay, not a big deal, except that it's something that you may do hundreds of times a day, right? Another example that's massively huge is this. Not only can you instantly be in edit mode, because I am in edit mode all the time in Blender 2.79, but also at any time I can hit the E key and just start sculpting. I don't have to switch modes. There's no mode switching. And Amar, appreciate your comment. I knew someone would chime in and tell me how well this or that version performs for them. And of course, that's always the case. People do get different results. But see, I'm saying, from a practical standpoint, as somebody who just cares about actually getting cool work done, I don't care about having the latest, greatest features if those features don't help me. Okay? And so for me, if my basic workflow is I'm doing a pencil test and then I'm doing maybe ink in Blender, then the question is what tool gets me to the result I'm after in the most unimpeded fashion. At this point, I would say for the most part, it's probably Blender 2.79. But it's close. It's a close battle between 2.79 and 2.81. Because see, I just hit the E key, and I can dial this in, and then the D key, and I'm back to drawing. There's no popping up a pie menu, which is click, click. And then the other thing you find with Blender 2.81 that I really haven't mentioned here, but it's something that comes up all the time, is that the pie menu for me has always been, and this is 5 years of it, or whatever it's been, 4 or 5 years since Blender 2.8 started, of the pie menu is a little persnickety. In other words, it's easy to make the pie menu pop up on the screen, and then if you don't hold your fingers down on the keys and then click the key, what happens is you pop up the pie menu, and then when you lift up your fingers, the pie menu actually disappears, so you have to learn to pop it up, then click, and then you can let go with both hands, right, kind of thing. So you'd go, well, that's stupid. I mean, come on. Really? That's a big deal? Well, actually, yeah. When you do it 1,000 times a day, because that's something you do 1,000 times a day. And so you guys have seen it here, where I will pop up the pie menu, and it'll disappear, and then I'll pop it up again, and sometimes I'll pop it up 2 or 3 times, because I'm moving fast, and I'll miss it. I'll basically miss the pie menu. In Blender 2.79, we don't have that issue because there's no pie menu. There's no pie menu. When I want to sculpt, I just hit the E key and go. Right? So anybody who's going to criticize that workflow, I'm going to always risk getting snarky and saying to them, okay, let me see what you're doing in Blender. Let me see your work. Let me see how you're getting stuff done. And usually, again, at the risk of being snarky, usually the answer is going to be no answer at all, probably, if I were to ask that question in most cases. Because most of the people that ask those questions, seemingly from an informed standpoint as somebody that's getting work done and seems baffled by the idea that I would do it this way, those people aren't usually people that are actually getting much done at all that you're going to turn into a real show or whatever. They're just not. And that's okay. It's everybody does their own thing, and it's all good. In this case, while drawing, I can instantly just lasso a bunch of stuff, say let's rotate it a little bit, SX, rotate it back, and now I've just, and then I just hit the A key to deselect all, and now I just fixed the fact that I drew his head too narrowly. Okay? So now here's an interesting question that comes up then. Is, well, what about interoperability? Okay, I don't care about fill operations because in Blender 2.79, all I care about is the ability to draw and sculpt, and so then it becomes a matter of drawing and then just jumping to another layer. And then typically for me, I'm going to switch brushes. I'll typically go to this one, this super smooth ink. That gives me that Alex Toth kind of look. And it's just got enough. See how shaky that is? But when I let go, it smooths it right out. And I can get an ink line look that's quite nice. The only obviously that was a mistake, and so I just hit the right mouse button and erase it. So a question that comes up is, well, what about interoperability between 2.79 and 2.81? One thing people might complain about, and they have, in fact, with 2.79 is the fact that you can only have one grease pencil object in a scene at a time. May I say to you that I have maybe ever had one shot that I did where that really became a problem. Like that, the idea of only having one grease pencil object actually is something that seems like a really big deal that turns out not to be at all. Now, it does require a little bit of housekeeping. So you say, okay, if it's a problem, let's say, how often does the problem come up? Well, it's a problem that comes up once or twice a month. Okay. So what extra hoops do you have to jump through once or twice a month to compensate for that problem? Right? And the answer is, well, you take your grease pencil object, you got two options. One is you can actually click here and toggle between multiple grease pencil objects. It's not that you can't have 10 of them in your scene. It's just that you can only see one of them at a time, right? Well, what do? You render the thing out and then bring it in as images mapped to planes and combine that with your grease pencil stuff. I've done that a zillion times. So yeah, it takes 1 minute of extra housekeeping. That's true. But then you compare your 1 minute of housekeeping to stuff that you have to do like all the time, 100% of the time, using, a different tool. For example, like I said with the pie menu. The pie menu thing's something that's going to come up 1,000 times a day versus the problem of only having one grease pencil object visible at a time is a problem that comes up once a month. This is a big difference. And only somebody that's doing, like a lot of work would understand what's actually important. So that's kind of part of my mission here, is to help you guys understand what you're going to run into and what, sort of after the fact turns out to have actually been important versus the things that we initially think are going to be important. Having the coolest, latest features, I have to say emphatically, is almost always by far the least important thing. Because those features have to work seamlessly and perfectly, or they become more of a problem than a help, right? So anyway, there's Luka. So one question that came up for me, and believe me, I'm asking myself these questions, they're hard questions, is, well, what about interoperability with Blender 2.79 and 2.81? Well, it turns out it's not a problem. Okay, so what if I didn't want to go over to Krita for ink and paint? What if I didn't want to pre-render it and then import the animation frames? Can I save my Blender project and then just jump into 2.81? I'm going to quit and not even save that. Can I jump into 2.81 and just get right back to work if I want to go ahead and do my painting in Blender? Because sometimes I probably would. Well, it turns out that, let me see if it's this one. Yeah, I think it's this one. When I bring the, yes, if I open up the 2.79 blend file in 2.81, you're going to have some housekeeping to do. Because Blender's choking on the interface, because the whole layout is different. However, if you go ahead and just create a new project in Blender and instead append the grease pencil object, then it's not a problem at all. So we go to Salt and Light, Scenes. Which shot is it? Was it 086? Or I'm 089, I think. Let me look here. So bear with me, folks. 089. And there it is. Okay, so I double click the Blender 2.79 file, and then I just go to G Pencil, and there's Luka, and I just double click it. So now the catch is that your 2.8 project has a default grease pencil object, so you got to go up here and switch to the Luka object. And there he is. Right? Boop. There is no problem here. And then in my case, what I actually did was just brought him in and then colored him, So then the question would be, well, why wouldn't you just do the sculpting and the pencil test and all that right here in Blender 2.81? And the answer is, well, probably a lot of times you would. But like I said, if you're trying to move fast and you want the most interactive, just fluid, unimpeded workflow, which for me, others may differ, but for me means being able to just really quickly toggle between drawing, erasing, sculpting, and edit mode with the proportional editing tool, typically. Just being able to bounce between those four things as seamlessly as possible, where it's just one finger on one key, boom, you're there. Over the course of an entire project, becomes quite a bit more efficient than having to pop up a pie menu and then do a click. It's a very small thing, but it does add up, right? So, okay. As I expected, Amar has a lot of comments. So, Yeah, okay, so Amar, you're being that guy. He says you can add camera depth of field. That's exactly. I said when I showed in Krita what I did with the background, I said somebody's going to chime in and say, "Well, and you could add depth of field and you could do focal, there's of course. There's all kinds of ways there's many ways to solve the same problem. Right? I think a Blender to insert program workflow would be better. So Blender, whatever you use. Yeah, for me, I'm kind of leaning towards Krita, just because the ability to do effectively post-production, color correction, adding gradients, shadows, blah blah blah, is just really quick in a layer-based program. Essentially, a Photoshop type of program works really, really well for that, if it can animate, which of course Krita can. So, making it agnostic. So, making it agnostic would make it more broad. Yeah, I guess I would say the common thread is the pictures. Okay. I mentioned yesterday, one thing that's kind of cool is ostensibly you could do, oopsie poo, I'm on the wrong program. Ostensibly, you could do, now I lost my train of thought. I was thinking about pencil test to ink in Blender. Yeah, I lost my thought. Sorry. If I was doing a class or program, doing it outside of building the curriculum, I would make sure that it's versatile enough to be used by anyone. But these gotchas, well, I'm not interested in making it versatile enough to be used by anyone, actually, other than the fact that, well, in other words, with the conceit of a workflow that I'm teaching a workflow because my workflow works, theoretically, as opposed to, I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that not just in the animation arena, but in all arenas, you have a climate where the information that generally is well promoted and available to everyone, to educate us about the amazing things that are available to us, there's a vibe about that latest, greatest information that is always a little bit smug. And admittedly, I'm being smug too. I'm smug about my workflow. Okay, but the latest, greatest news is always smug, as if it's like, oh, of course you have to do that. Everybody who's cool or everybody who is doing amazing work, of course this is how they work. Okay, and yet, what I've also seen over the years, it's like back in the day when Ron Thornton and his team were doing the special effects for Babylon 5. Okay, and the thing is, if you were cool back then, you were using Maya, or possibly Alias, because it was sort of that vintage. But there was 3D Studio. I think Max was out. But Lightwave was not the cool kid on the block. But Lightwave was kind of like Blender 2.79 in the fact that it was a little bit crude, but by golly, you could get the work done, And it had a slow renderer, admittedly. But those guys used Lightwave because it was a purely economic consideration. It wasn't about being the coolest guys on the block. They had a client that was paying them to do a job, and they got the job done. Client didn't care how they did it. Couldn't possibly care less how they did it, right? Back in the day, if somebody created a cool animation and it turned out they used Hash Animation Master instead of Maya, what are you going to do? Say the animation's no good because it was created with the wrong tool? Right? The people that matter are the people that are getting work done, not the reporters, is what I'm saying. Okay? And Amar's correct. The push with Grease Pencil was to make it a real tool for animation. It was my contention before Blender 2.8 ever came out that Blender 2.79 Grease Pencil was already a very effective tool for 2D animation. So everything you're saying about making it a quote-unquote real tool is from the vantage point of the reporters. In other words, the people that are working for a magazine or something that have their nose up in the air, that don't actually do the work, Of course, they're going to say, well, we want to see Blender become a real tool. We want to become a viable competitor. You know, except that Daniel Lara was already doing very cool work with Blender 2.7. Sorry. You know what I mean? So let me see here. Depth of field blur you mentioned in reference to the class you were referring to. Well, I didn't mention depth of field blur in relation to a class. I mentioned blur in relation to here's a shot in Krita, and we have a depth of field blur where the whole idea was that I wanted the blur up top and down towards the ground, you know, ostensibly where things are closer. I didn't want the blur. That's all that was. Okay, and so with that in mind, if I take my airbrush, well, I can't just airbrush it because I use erase. I didn't use an erase layer. I actually erased. But what I did was I just erased the bottom, and so all I did was just defocus it, and you know, so there it is defocused. There it is defocused. You know, took 30 seconds, right? Yeah, you could use a lot more sophisticated, theoretically more realistic, you know, ways to get a defocus background. But I was kind of thinking pragmatically. Blifton, grease pencil for animation, sculpting to make it more like ZBrush, and geometry nodes to make it like Houdini. Yeah, and that's pretty much what you have in Blender 3. Or even 2.93, you don't have the geometry nodes quite at the level they're at in 3, but... Okay, so sorry, Amar, if I misunderstood something you... So I completely disagree. I'm going to go back about halfway here. You said the grease pencil was still more of an annotation tool in 2.79. I don't agree at all. I completely dispute that. I just created this art right here, and believe me, I could have animated it in 2.79. I just brought it into 2.8 to color it, you know. And so yeah, I don't agree with that assertion. It was more of an annotation tool. Not at all. Most of the tools that showed up in Blender 2.8 for grease pencil were actually already present in 2.79. That's a fact. You could do the sculpting. You could do draw behind, for example, if you wanted to put color on the screen that where the strokes were behind the ones that were already there, you know. So, you know, I don't know if you saw my early comments regarding depth of field, but okay, so we'll skip that. I would say the reason why there are issues in the UI changes and some other updates. Well, yeah, but you know, and I come to anything that's about featureitis in software tools with a jaundiced eye for this simple reason. When Blender converted to 2.5, there was a promise on the table, and the promise on the table was the new interface was going to be a dramatic improvement in workflow, and they achieved it. They did. It took 10 years. It took 10 years to get from Blender 2.5 to 2.79. Took 10 years. Okay, so when they said they were going to come out with 2.8, which I like 2.8. Hell, I like version 3. It's all good. I said, okay, you know, we'll see. We'll wait and see. And heck, I was an early adopter. But my point is that if you break your animation flow into steps where you're looking at the responsiveness and the ability to take what's in your heart and your mind and get it out, then Blender 2.79 is a really good tool for that, because it's really fast and seamless to just be drawing, sculpting, editing, twisting things around. You know, and by the way, I'll tell you this too. Let's take another example. Like the whole, I won't go through the details on Blender 2.81 here, but I'll tell you that if you want to bring in an image sequence, either an image or an image sequence, mapped to planes using the, okay, and a great example of what I'm talking about. I just hit Shift A, doesn't work. I need to first hit my pie menu and jump back to edit, or to object mode. Okay, I can live with that. But here in Blender 2.8, if we map images to planes, and then you look at just, again, I'm not going to demonstrate, but if you go through the whole process of what it takes to map images to planes, subdivide them, maybe parent them to a bone rig, like so you want to do some really quick and dirty animation with, IK armatures, I would venture to say it will take you at least 5 times as long to go from what you're trying to do to being able to actually do it in Blender 2.8 compared to 2.79. The importing images as planes and then just mapping it to an IK rig is like stupid easy in Blender 2.7. Like it takes 1 minute and then you just click the little toggle that says automatic IK and it works really, really well. In other words, if you map an image to a plane and then just spend 1 minute setting up some quick and dirty bones in Blender 2.79, you're going to instantly, just by the defaults, have a result that's very similar to what you get in Anime Studio with bones. It's real smart. It gets it really close to right, usually right out of the gate. You don't have to set up vertex groups. You can, of course, if you want more control, but you don't have to, right? So anyway, alias, yada yada yada, grease pencil firm, you're seeing the comment the way I mentioned. The comments are not tied to what you're talking to. Okay, fine. Sorry about that, Amar. I find it showing the times in the comments. How that's true. When I look at that, Darren, you're right. I know you're not getting the way I said that. So anyway, but it's my comments, Amar, are not necessarily even predicated on what you said and what you meant, as much as oftentimes those comments come through in regard to certain things where, again, they're sort of coming from a vantage point that is interesting and sort of helpful, but doesn't really come from the vantage point of somebody that's getting a lot of real work done, And so that's not you. I'm not talking about you there. The whole hero movie and Daniel using it to add what became 2.8 and beyond because of this push. Well, right, exactly. So Amar is sort of reporting what the history was, with Blender. 279 worked certain how the annotate tool, and you could just annotated them. The workflow has changed because of the direction they went with the promotion of the tool. They were not doing that. Yeah, I mean, everything you can say about, I hate to say this, but everything you can say about the difference in capability between Blender 2.79 and 2.8, I almost uniformly disagree. Like almost everything you can do in 2.8 was present in 2.79. And keep in mind, by the way, that the ability to directly parent a grease pencil object to armatures and get any kind of predictable result never did get solved in the 2.8 series. Never did get solved. I don't know if they have solved it yet. Right? So you have to use a lattice as an intermediary element. So the difference in 2.79 is really 2.8 forward and up to 3. The difference with the grease pencil is, number 1, you can fill. Okay. Number 2, you've got modifiers. Okay. That's basically it. That's the, to me, that's, as I say, it's to be this way, but just trying to get work done. What's the real difference that actually matters? Well, you got modifiers and you got a fill tool. That's it. Everything else, and by the way, some aspects of it work wonderfully and some of it are still clunky. So if I was going to offer a course about blendering, I would, to the collective gasp of everyone in the room, I would certainly consider the advantages of working in 2.79 early in the animation process as opposed to later. So, once again, we've got our drawing of Luka. We know we can smack it onto another layer for, for inking. And if you really want to, you can actually do the inking. And I don't recommend this. I don't think this is a great workflow. It's kind of there if you really wanted to do it, but is you can see by simply having materials that have both a stroke and a fill, you know, you can, I've done plenty of shots in salt and light that way, actually, you know. Or if you don't like that idea, well, you can always duplicate a layer like that and then add some thickness and a tint to the one that's behind, which gives you instant magic outlines, you know. So it's like there's always a way to do it. But those are clunky, admittedly. They're pretty clunky ways to get the job done. So the fill tool was the big step forward in 2.8 was the fill tool. And it took them about, I don't know, well, it took about 3 years to really get it to the point where it was like awesome. You know, about 3 years. So, is the works in progress folder on this disco for public use? Yes. Yeah, Blifton. Yeah, post your work in progress. Love to see it. You can say that MS Paint is an animation program. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's true. That you're kind of making my point for me, Jim, is for me, all I care about is, can I get the job done? You know, that's literally the only thing that matters. And again, what I'm trying to optimize is to be able to do it in an unimpeded way. The significant takeaway, you guys, is this. Luka in this shot was animated in Blender. Okay? It was efficient, it was effective, and it was fun. Well, we want alliteration, so we'll say it was efficient, it was effective, and it was enjoyable. E. And when I get a workflow that's efficient, effective, and enjoyable, I'm kind of noticing. I'm kind of noticing that. So it was not a workflow where I felt like I was really struggling and fighting with the tools every step of the way, as so often has been the case. So that's my opinion. And as I'm looking at this, by the way, I can still see a couple things that probably need to be fixed. If you look real close, right there, you can see a little flaw in the fill operation on his mouth. So there's always things to tweak a bit. But it was, it definitely didn't feel like punishment to get this shot done. So I'm really glad it turned out that way. Okay, so let's say, what are we going to do today? But all that you can remove. The brushes, the ability to paint, a camera control. Okay, so Amar, I'm going to go ahead and take a moment with your comments here. But all of that, so I have to refer back to what all of that is. Okay, I think you're talking about the difference between 2.79 and 2.8. Okay. But all of that you can remove. The brushes, those were present in 2.79. Not the paint brushes, not what we have now with the palette. But remember, the palette is implemented in kind of a strange way, and we had camera control, we had easing control, we had an intuitive timeline. Yeah, we had all that in Blender 2.79. Odd ones out was done in Paint Tool Sci. I haven't seen that. That guy built a large channel. Yeah, and Paint Tool Sci, which is not really an animation program. So, but the amazing thing about Krita that most people don't consider, it's like one of the limitations in Krita is you can't animate vector layers. Okay, so now I'm not saying that vector layers in Krita are good because they're really not very performant. Okay, they're a little clunky for sure. But one thing a lot of people don't necessarily consider is that you can animate vector layers in Krita. But you have to do it in an unconventional way, which is you have to actually create multiple layers, and then actually Krita just blew up, so thank you version 5. But what you do is you basically toggle between the layers, and then when you've got the movement working the way you want, you convert the layers to a animated paint layer. So yeah, there's a conversion step. It's a little bit of a clunker, but it's a lot less of a clunker than what guys used to have to do when they were working on paper, right? In fact, that workflow is kind of tantamount to what it is like to work on paper, or to animate in a program like Paint Tool Sci, I would imagine. You're just saying, okay, well, let's just isolate one layer at a time and build up our animation the old school way by page flipping, And I think that's a really good discipline because it forces you to really think about your timing. You can't get into what I was talking about yesterday where you get sucked into the coolness of making things move on the screen. When you get sucked into that, because the tools are awesome, what you do is you never learn to plan timing. You know, you don't learn the fundamental basics of animation because you never had to in order to have that thrill of seeing things move around the screen. So in that sense, some of our cool tools really are kind of detrimental, at least to a learning process. So anyway, the process of, and by the way, in Blender 2.79, I can hit the 1 key. Well, okay, unless it doesn't work. There we go. 1 key, 2 key, 3 key. I can actually toggle between the brushes. Don't know if you knew that, but you can. Now there is a catch, and the catch is while you're drawing, which is the D key, you have to hit escape, and then you can toggle between your brushes. So if I want the dip pen, then I just hit D and start the brush moving, and now I've got my dip pen. Right? So, but anyway, oops. Yeah, they changed the panel maximize hotkey in Blender 2.8, so I've had to sort of get used to that. It was in Blender, it was control page up, page down for 20 years, and they changed it to control spacebar, which I'm not sure what that even does in Blender 2.79. So, but now he has a team and uses different software, but that's where he started. Well, it's just like Raf Anzeman, you know, he was doing amazing stuff in Hash, but as soon as he could afford it and had a little bit of street cred, he jumped over to Maya. I don't blame him. Maya is definitely a more powerful tool. So I don't actually have to do this drawing of Luka necessarily. If I jump back to the show, I need to load up the show, because we do have a close-up of Luka, and we're still chewing through the second webisode because I made the command decision to stop charging to a February 1 release and focus on quality a little bit more than speed. So what we had here was, and Amar pointed out yesterday quite rightly that the characterization here on Mel is a little off. And when we get up to these shots up here, it's way off. I really want to fix that. So, but where are we at right now is, here's the shot we just did with Luka. Mel says his line, and then we've got this shot of Luka. So I think this shot of Luka actually, I'm not loving the background, but more importantly, I'm not sure I'm loving Monkey. I think when I added the backlight effects, I think I kind of went overboard, frankly. So the reason I said that is because all those things can also be done in 3, just like 2.79. Well, that's true too. That's true too. I can't, in good conscience, say that it's best to just dive in and learn Blender 3, because having had the experience of 2.79, there's no question that while the features are more extensive in 3, the real day-to-day grind of just cranking this stuff out, for me, is slower in 2.8 and forward, you know. And if you need a fill tool, I just demonstrated a little bit ago that you could actually do your work. You could, if you want to do your ink and pencil test in Blender 2.79, it's not a problem to bring the grease pencil object into 2.8 for inking, or presumably 2.3. I mean version 3. I don't know that though. I haven't tried importing 2.79 grease pencil into version 3. Probably works, but I just can't say definitively that it does. So, if I were going to re-envision this shot, if I was going to re-envision that right now, just for fun, this would not be a bad place to start, frankly, because this is a pretty good drawing of Luka. it looks like the right shape for his head, blah, 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 although his ear is a bit in the wrong place. So doing things the Blender 2.79 way, I am going to just go ahead and actually shrink that ear a little bit, hit the G key, crank up my proportional editing so this stretches up a bit, jump to front view and flip the canvas and say, well, is that about right? Not quite. Not quite. I want to kind of twist that around a little bit and then S key shift so I can scale it up just a smidgen. And hit the A key so I'm selecting none. And now I really shouldn't have put the extra ink line in there. I shouldn't be doing ink at all, actually, if the truth be known. So this line's a little bit erroneous, and that's just because I drew it with the wrong brush. Right? Everyone understand? So, again, that was actually a boo-boo. I'm in the ink layer. I'm going to make my life easier by just deleting the ink layer. Let's delete everything except our sketch layer. That way, there's no chance of being in the wrong... I mean, when you're doing a pencil test, why do you need 5 layers, right? Oh, yeah, the other thing in 2.8 for sure is masking. Masking in 2.8 and forward, of course, is extremely cool. But that's masking is a great example of where, again, if you do masking like for shadows, in 2.8 you just have a layer and you just click the little icon and now it's a masked layer and that's that. In 2.3 or in 3, well, actually, I think in the 2.9 series as well, but certainly in 3. If you want to do masking, you have to actually go down into the little pop-open box and set up a couple things. Not a big deal. It takes 15 seconds, but it's 15 seconds you didn't have to spend in 2.8, 2.81. So, pick your poison. Pick your poison, friends. So, oh yeah, and another thing, and this is where the modifiers in 2.81 are awesome, is if I'm doing a straight-on shot of a character, I'm almost surely going to do it in 2.81. Because I can turn on the mirror modifier, and get perfect symmetry. You can't do that in... Well, let me think about it. I don't think you can. I don't think there's a way to do that in 2.79. If you're really clever about it, maybe there is kind of a way, but I don't think so. So, let's get back to our camera view. So... what we're trying to do here is just get a basic bead on Luka dialed in. And so his eye shape is not correct, obviously. It's just I got circles in there as a guide, more or less. Usually with Luka, that's what I do. I'll draw the circles and then go in and tighten up the actual correct eye shape, and then his eyebrows. Sometimes it's nice to, again, here in 2.79 what I do is I just hit the right mouse on my stylus and it instantly is going into erase mode. In Blender 2.8 you would hit the control key to go into erase mode. So it's about the same, in terms of workflow, about the same. Let's say a little bit of sculpt. So I hit the E key, so I'm sculpting. Just want to make that a little bit bigger. Hey Reva, let's see. So Maria gave a congratulations, so I'm curious to see what the congratulation was about. I think proxy 3D sets would help greatly for certain shots. Yeah, it can. It can. When I was working on the Futurama thing, of course, we created the lounge area on the spaceship, in their headquarters, in 3D. So can be useful. I think I'll get that opportunity soon. Familiarity is what. So I think I'll get that opportunity soon to work on just the rest of the year, just doing animation, art, and comics. We'll know in a couple months. Boys, hey brother, I hope so. That would be awesome. I'd love for you to have that opportunity. It's a wonderful thing for you because it's like, okay, we got no excuses now, baby. We got the opportunity. go kill it, you know, crush it, as we like to say these days. You can also create a perspective grid easier in the newer versions. Yeah, I mean, perspective grids are something that a lot of people talk about and can be quite useful. You know, I mean, I think if I was doing tons of background painting, especially interiors, well, or cityscapes, things like that. Yes, Reva, it's hard to... I don't think it's fair to say it's hard to use, but there's a lot to learn. If you want a quick start, if you want to spend a half an hour to just get a quick start, look on my channel for a Blender 2.81 for newbies. Blender 2.81 grease pencil for newbies. And I assume that you're probably interested in 2D animation as opposed to 3D. So, Blender 2.81 for newbies. That's a very popular video. A lot of people have watched that one. So we're going to change the dialogue in the show, by the way, so that what Luka is actually doing is, I need to actually update the script, as a matter of fact. So what's going on is, oh, hey, Luka. Oh, hey, Mel. Who's your friend? Oh, he just sort of follows me around. Or to use the voice of Luka, oh, he just sort of follows me around. I don't really know where he came from, but he keeps on coming and following me like day after day after day. I cannot stop him, and so what am I going to do? And then Mel is like, oh, gotcha. And then he hears the beggar, and then we go on from there. So we've got this other shot where Luka jumps in. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change Luka's line to say, hey, I know. I will call him Monkey. And Mel's like, okay. He's like, I don't really care, Luka. Right? He's distracted by the girl. So I think that'll work. I think that's going to be a good little workflow. So, and then this shot that I'm working on right here, of course, can be used for both close-ups. So then we'll have some uniformity between those two shots, because right now they are a little bit different. And that's not a good thing. We want consistency, friends. Consistency in both our workflow and in the results that we produce. Produce or procure. But all the information about that's the other big thing about Blender. Definitely Amar's making a great point. Blender, in terms of community support and educational materials and all the rest, is so far beyond OpenTunes and Krita that there's no contest. I mean, of the three programs, Blender is the only one that's been, let's say, is being widely accepted and utilized and adopted in the professional special effects and, to a lesser extent, of course, 2D animation workspace. But it's happening. It is happening. There are big shots that are starting to give the grease pencil a serious look. You know, I see you have Krita. Do you like the new 5 update? Yeah, I like the transform mask. So my little jingle I play at the beginning, all of the animation of the head here that you're about to see.
If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
So all of the animation of the head there was done with a transform mask. And so, yeah. Tahoma, Krita, and Blender are my tools of choice, and lately Blender's been kind of coming more to the top of the heap, I would say. There's something about Luka's eyes I don't like. If I cover up, I see what the problem is. I'm gonna erase this one and redraw it. Now, one thing I can do here is, since I'm already in edit mode all the time, what I can do is grab this, go Shift D, okay, and then I hit SX-1. Oops, can't do it with proportional editing, so I hit the O key first. SX-1. Hello? Okay, I made a mistake, so let's hit undo. Okay, let me do that again. I apologize, friends. It looks like some of the drawing that I just did sort of got enucleated, though. Probably should have saved my work, but no big deal. So there's a quirk. There's a quirk. It would have been good if I actually had done this on a separate keyframe, because that alone would have saved that work. But anyway, my point was this. Control, grab, delete. Okay, if you're gonna duplicate strokes, do not be in proportional editing mode. If your point is that you're trying to mirror something and flip it, you absolutely do not want to be in proportional editing mode. It won't work. Okay? So I have said it. So before I did what I should have done just a minute ago, I should have hit the O key and turned proportional editing off. What I actually did wrong was I hit it once when I needed to hit it twice, because I was in connected mode, and when I hit O, it switched it to projected 2D mode. What I meant to do was just turn it off. So in this case, I needed to hit it twice. If I had already been in connected mode, or I'm sorry, projected 2D mode, then I would have only had to hit O once. So anyway, stupid mistake. That's okay. Control, grab, shift. Okay, and I'm going to move it out of the way just to make it clean and easy. And now what I'm going to do is go scale x minus 1. Okay, now I can hit the R key to rotate it around, and now at least we can see that we've got eyes that match. And one thing you can do in Blender at any time is you can see what's going on here. You can hit the shift key so that when you drag things around, instead of moving fast, you can really dial them in. Move slow, and as you can see, your mouse will wrap around the screen. Okay, now the only problem with this, obviously, is that we've got the pupil in the wrong place. So I'm just going to actually grab the pupil. I mean, we might as well. Why not? We're just having fun here anyway. All right, and this probably isn't going to work that well, but just go like that. So, kind of works. D key, go back to drawing, because really we don't want to get into a lot of extra sculpting for no good reason. But that pretty well accomplished the goal of getting Luka's eyes balanced out. So, I should not feel bad all the time about where I'm at. Don't feel bad all the time, man. We're all where we are, and that's the only place we can ever be. When even Aaron Blaze has been working on his short film for quite a while, I'm nowhere near his skill level. Yeah, well, none of us are, I suppose. Yeah, and I mean, Richard Williams, one could argue he never really did finish The Thief and the Cobbler. And it took him about, whatever he did finish, took him like 20 years, so. Why do you think I try to have why do I have the 3 E's? Why are these important to me? Why do I agonize over workflow and software tools? Whoops. And here's the big one. The 3 E's. Why are these important? They're all important because this means I can get the work done fast, and I'm in. I just did this wrong. Efficient, effective. Little dyslexia moment there, folks. Enjoyable. You got to have fun because you're going to be doing a lot of work. Efficiency means I'm not running through molasses. It's not a cumbersome experience just to do simple things where I feel like I'm fighting my tools. And by the way, to be fair, for the most part, that is true across the board with Tahoma 2D, actually. I still maintain for most people, it's the best place to start if you want to do 2D animation, just because none of the tools are best of breed, but they're all pretty good, and you can get work done. And the learning curve is pretty short. Effective means the more complex things that I sort of maybe can envision that I wish I could do, I am in fact able to do. And then enjoyable, again, because you're going to be doing this a long time, you better have fun. Otherwise, you're not going to stick with it. You're going to quit. Of course you will. So this workflow of so far with Blender into Krita seems to be achieving that criteria for the most part. No complaints. And right now, what I'm doing right now, it really wouldn't matter for me whether I'm in Blender 2.79 or 2.8 plus. It really doesn't matter. It's about the same. So Luka's going to say, and by the way, let me show you something else, guys. This is actually something cool you guys might really appreciate. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to, let's call this close up. Okay, and let me pull something up in Blender 2.81 that I think you guys might find quite interesting. I forgot about this. I did this last night. I was doing a shot from basically webisode 3, okay? I did this shot of, this is a great example of where if you know how to use the digital tools, it can become quite powerful. Okay. And let me see here. I got to get my bearings. We have this grease pencil object parented to a lattice. So I would assume if I hit Shift F9 that the lattice is turned off, so I can't see it. Okay, but what I did was I created shape keys on the lattice. Okay, this is something, some people will be turned on by this, other people will be like, whatever, you know, who cares? So it just depends on your proclivity. But for me, if I look at the lattice, I actually created 1, 2, 3, 4 shape keys. And as we toggle between them, you'll see these different shapes that I created. Very subtle, very small changes from the original drawing. But by sequencing them, hit Shift F9, by sequencing the shape keys, I wound up with, well, I guess I can't see the, since it's hidden, I can't show the animation keys unless I make this visible. Where is the lattice? I might be having a bit of yeah, there it is. Having a little bit of a stupid attack just because the rapid switch from one software to the other. That's interesting. Do you see what just happened there? So that's a little bit of a buggy thing in Blender 2.81, I would say, where you're clicking on the lattice and the keys don't show up, but then if you click between the object and the data block, then they show up. So it's a little bit strange. But you can see these animation keys, okay? But you don't see it animating because we're in edit mode. Now watch what happens when we go ahead and turn the lattice off. Well, we don't want to be in edit mode, so let's hit tab to be in object mode. When we turn that off and just look at what we have in the animation. So I got to animate Asher's face. But what he does is he says, well, it's always a pleasure to stand in the presence of the king. And then he winks at the king. So that all that animation was done with a single lattice using shape keys. So you say, well, who cares? Why is that important? Well, it's important because that means all I have to do is ink this one drawing of Asher and then just have a couple grease pencil frames where I change his face. Just change the eyes and the mouth, which I did right there, obviously. But all the acting is being done with shape keys on lattices. So, you know, just kind of quick, kind of easy to get a result that looks pretty good, I would say. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, anything interesting you'd like to say? You shouldn't berate yourself for where you are. Well, that's for sure. We all do it, though. I mean, let's be honest. We all do it. Crazy how you can be patient for a lot of things, but impatient for... Yeah, correct. Well, plus, we tend to be easier on others than on ourselves. Blender Grease Pencil seems like a far more advanced version of Tahoma, like it does the same stuff, but more. The killer feature, Riva, that makes Blender grease pencil compelling compared to Tahoma. Like if you look at ink and paint, you look at post-production effects and things like that, in some ways Tahoma is superior, and certainly they're pretty similar capabilities. If you take what you do in the Blender grease pencil and you render out image sequences and then you do some compositing, then basically the two programs are the same, you know, in terms of what they can do. Okay, so what's the killer feature in Blender that sets it apart from Tahoma for me? It's going to be sculpting for sure. So in other words, when I'm drawing, let's go into our grease pencil object. So when I'm drawing, to be able to jump to sculpt mode and just and drag things around like this and edit it with no loss of resolution, because this is a vector format. That means the lines stay perfectly crisp no matter what you do. That's the killer feature. That's the thing that makes Blender, at least in that respect, superior to OpenToonz or Tahoma. You can kind of come close with the plastic tool in Tahoma, frankly. I mean, you really can, but it's harder, quite a bit harder. So for me, I'm in Blender 2.79 just because it's really seamless and easy for me to draw. Then I hit my E key, and I can just start sculpting. Sculpt. D key. Oh, now I'm drawing again. It's just really, really quick. And I say, well, there's something I really need to grab and drag around the screen, and I don't want to use the sculpting tool because it's a little too microscopic. And I say, okay, I just hit escape, and then I click right there, and then I have to hit proportional editing O key. But now, oh, look at that. I can just kind of drag things around, whip it into shape, yada, yada, yada. So that gives you an idea of why I'm working in Blender 2.79. All of those switches between the different modes in Blender 2.8 would require you to hit Control Tab, bring up the pie menu, and then click on the option you want. It still only takes about 1 second, but as I was saying to Amar earlier, you know, when you have to do it 1,000 times a day, it does kind of add up. It kind of adds up, friends. 2.5. Okay, so seems like maybe very true. One of the disciplines I'm trying to teach myself, the hard component. Take time, be patient, try to get it right. I do want to upload something on my YouTube channel, but that's not as important as completing my aim for this. The ability to combine 3D elements with 2D is powerful also. Absolutely. 2.5D. Now, and to be fair, you can do very effective 2.5D in Tahoma. Just if for those who don't know, in Tahoma, I can demonstrate it this way. In Tahoma, if you click this little button right here, boom, it gives you a 3D view, and then you can actually hit Control Spacebar and toggle around to sort of dial in how you want to look at it. And then this is the point here. If I hit the A key to use the Animate Tool, you can animate your layers in Z space. Sorry, I did that wrong. You got to hit Control in Z space, so that then you can actually get shots with parallax and whatnot. You know, you can animate the camera and get the parallax and all that kind of stuff that turns people on. So totally doable in Tahoma. Obviously integrated everywhere in Blender, since Blender is really first and foremost a 3D modeling, rendering, and animation program. Okay, so a little bit of a sculpt there. D key, blah, 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 blah. I think I'm going to go ahead and show his knee. One other thing about Blender that I do like too, where it kind of beats both Tahoma and Krita, is that you fundamentally always have an infinite canvas. It's not a huge thing, but it definitely can be nice to just be able to draw anywhere and not have. And then you say, well, why does that matter? Well, what if my character was kind of framed wrong? Well, I can hit the A key, S key to scale, and I can completely reframe my shot. G key to move, Shift key to slow it down so I can really dial in the movement, yada, yada, yada. And you say, well, yeah, but look at this. Here's a complaint. You say, well, yeah, but if I reframed it, now the drawing or the translation is baked into the drawing. So what you might say is, well, what if I had, we'll take this to extremes. What if I had a whole bunch of animation and that was what I needed to translate? In other words, I wanted to reframe my animation, but I've got all the, I can't go in, what am I going to do? Scale them one at a time and hope that I'm going to scale them all exactly the same amount? No, friend, that's not what you're going to do. What you're going to do is you're going to insert an empty into your scene. Sorry, I want to be in object mode, so I'm going to hit tab, grab the empty, scale it down, move it over here, and then looky, looky, looky. If I go back into edit strokes mode, I'm going to go down here, and I'm just going to parent the entire grease pencil object to the empty. That's it. Sorry. So then in object mode, anything I do with the empty takes the entire grease pencil object with it, animation included. That's all. That's it. Easy peasy. Now in 2.8 and forward, someone's going to say, well, why would you do that when you can just have a separate grease pencil object? There's actually some good reasons why you would do it this way. And you can still do it this way in Blender 2.8. It turns out, and you wouldn't know this, you know, if you just listen to all the pundits that are telling you all the cool features, you wouldn't know this. But and this just came up for me a couple days ago. It turns out there are many situations that have to do with using modifiers and things like that where you really want all of your grease pencil stuff to be in the same grease pencil object but just on separate layers. Turns out that's actually probably more useful more of the time in practice, at least for me. The other thing is when you create a new grease pencil object, unless you make a duplicate of the one you already were working on, you have to jump through some housekeeping hoops to set up your palette, set up your layers. You sort of have to start up everything from scratch. Now you can duplicate it, obviously, but so, you know, things to consider. Things to consider, my friends. Okay, so now the truth is I don't need these animation keys. And I don't need this. So I'm going to hit the X key and delete it. File, save. Okay. All right. Multiplaning and old school 3D method is not 3D in the same way. How is it different? Yeah, so Amar's saying also you can make a grease pencil object out of animated 2D and, well, 3D and 2D imported keyframes. He is correct. Who was it? Was it Inio-san? I don't remember. Somebody on Discord showed that to me the other day and said, isn't this super, super cool? You know, it was basically a 3D model that was, it's like what we used to do when we rendered 3D models with Freestyle, you know? It looks like hand-drawn 2D. It's like, that's kind of old news. But now you can, it's better integrated with the grease pencil, so it's like, I guess it's cool now. The use cases are, but this gets back to everything I was saying at the beginning of the live stream today, is you know, there's all these features that are like, that's so amazing. Well, okay, but show me how you're using it. Show me the use case that actually mattered, right? There may be one. It might be really significant. But show it to me, right? So this thing that was shown to me on Discord was essentially a 3D model that was rendered in solid mode, so you couldn't see through the character. So it's like a wireframe where all the wireframe lines are being rendered. But it's not transparent, so you know, so when the thing did a 3D revolution, or you know, just spinning around, it looked really cool. And I'm like, yeah, that is cool, but it's exactly what we've been able to do with Freestyle for, you know, 15 years in Blender, so it's, you know, not really impressing me too much. But this is what we do, you know, we find out that we can do something with a certain tool in a way that we couldn't before, and so we get all excited about it. That's what I was saying earlier. I'm like, yes, the transform masks in Krita allow us to do keyframe animation and move things around the screen. Oh my gosh, let's have a party. We can move things and do interpolated keyframes in Krita. Well, yeah, we've only been able to do that in Blender for 20 years. You say freestyle is way more clunky, but if you have good presets that you like, it tends to render a little slow, that's for sure. But if you have presets for freestyle and you set it up and you know how to edit the code or whatever, you pay a little bit of a price. But if the truth be known, let's see here. If the truth be known, let's go ahead and bring up a monkey and see what we can do with it. Okay, so we're in object mode, right? So if we look at Suzanne and we say, well, okay, let's just assign a material and we'll give it a high emit value, and I'll give it a color so that so we can see the darn thing, right? In fact, let's make it shadeless. In Blender, for years, and I haven't done this in a long time, so I don't know if I can find it really quick here, but for years in Blender, we've had the ability to, in the post-processing step, do the edge. And when it renders, it detects the edges, right? Okay, so this is what someone showed me, essentially what someone showed me on Discord. Isn't this cool? And I'm going, well, it is cool, but it's not that cool. I'm not really seeing the edges. Maybe the threshold's the opposite of what I think. Yep. Yeah, so you have to kind of dial it in. With freestyle, you wouldn't see through Suzanne. You wouldn't see through her. So these lines would be occluded. But that's the only thing that's different. I mean, you could set up a freestyle render that does that. In fact, can we? What's going on with freestyle? Let's turn on freestyle and see what we get just out of the box. Okay, so I'm not loving that, but I guarantee there's a freestyle setting that will give you the effect of basically it is occluded, so you can't see through the character, but all of the lines are rendered. I mean, it'd take a little jumping around to make it happen, but there's nothing especially cool about that, really. But when somebody posts a TikTok video where there's a 3D model that spins around, the cool thing about it was the model. Whoever created the anatomical model that was being spun around 3D space did a really good job of modeling it. That I will happily admit. It was quite good. But as far as getting excited about the look, okay, tell me how many shows you're going to use that in, okay? How are you going to use that? What show are you creating where what we want to see on the screen is essentially this? Okay, that's what we want to see. But isn't it so cool that we can render that? Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess that's cool. I mean, there's kind of something cool about that. But my question was, how are you going to use it in the real world? Okay? I'm not getting excited about features that are, I think I've made my point. It's like, who cares, man? Why is that? Why are this goes back to everything I said yesterday in my live stream. We're so gripped. We're so gripped and we're so excited about all this cool stuff we can do. And I'm going, okay, now go do something with it. What are you going to do with it? If you're not going to do anything with it, little models that spin around for 3/4 of 1 second in space have no market value. Do we get that? Do we understand? There is no place in the market for that. And if you can do it, you're one of only, 5 million people that can do it. Because, it's baked into the program maybe as a little demo piece. This is what happened back in the 90s. You get these guys that were trying to get CGI jobs in Hollywood, and they would actually take the demo materials that were literally delivered with Lightwave 3D, and they would just re-render the demo stuff and put it in their own demo reel. It's like, really? That's what you're going to do, huh? Okay. I don't think I'm going to be hiring you today. And of course, any producer worth his salt would know. They knew what all the demos were from Lightwave. They didn't need, Okay, so what's going on in the chat? Clunky. was not real time. That's true. That's true. And that's one of the great things with Blender 3, obviously. The real time rendering is amazing. I mean, it's awesome. You know, it's debatable in the real world, to just use that terminology. It is debatable how actual valuable that is. I think somebody in the 3D space where they're using the real time rendering to get the scene dialed in, I think it's super valuable for that. As far as not having to render offline, I mean, I think in fact you do. When you want to go ahead and you know, get your final output in Blender 2.8 forward, you know, as far as real-time rendering, you still have to hit Control F12, and it turns out that the real-time rendering is not as fast as the I'm sorry, the final render is not as fast as the real-time, and I assume that's because there's additional processing going on, anti-aliasing or whatever, that is bringing it to a quality level that I personally can't really see. Like, in other words, the real-time rendering is good enough for me, kind of thing. So, you know, I think for real-time lighting, though, it's hugely valuable. Okay, so I better get to work here. What Luka is doing, we're going to get back to this shot. So Luka said his line to Mel, and then Mel says his line, and this is what I'm basically working on right now. I'm kind of redoing this shot just because I just didn't love what I did, and plus I just kind of needed something to do. So, hello, where's my mouse? When you have 3 screens, it can become a little clunky to navigate. Okay, so I'm going way further than I need to in terms of the drawing here on Luka, but let's play around with what we might do on the animation side. Okay, so step 1, let's go to another keyframe, and our assumption would be that we always want to give it a half second to get into the shot. So let's go forward 4 frames because I'm operating at 8 frames a second. And then a normal tween where somebody's just shifting their body weight or whatever might be about 2 keys. Might be 2 frames, in other words. Okay. So now I'm in edit mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of work from the largest to the smallest. So I'm going to hit the A key so nothing is selected. And then I want to check and make sure my rotational axis is the cursor. That's another thing in Blender 2.8 and forward, by the way, is you have to toggle between the mode where you're selecting things or whatever and actually moving the cursor around the screen. Whereas in Blender 2.79, there's no mode switch for that. It just happens all the time, right? So, okay. So now what I want to do is hit the period key. And now it's going to toggle around the cursor. Okay, so in Blender 2.79, if you hit comma, it's going to rotate around the center, and if you hit period, it's going to rotate around the cursor. In 2.8, you're going to hit the period key, and a pop-up is going to come up, a pie menu, where you decide what you want the rotation to be. So you have more mouse clicks, but it's also more powerful. So that's your trade-off. That's pretty much the typical trade-off. So I'm going to say Luka would lean back a little bit. Maybe his knee would come up a little bit, so that's not completely inappropriate. And now what I'm going to do is turn the center to here and the influence down so that now he kind of straightens up like so. Okay? And now we're going to put our mouse here and then hit Control-Shift-E and interpolate an extra keyframe digitally between the two. So that now when we play it back, we get there, easy. All right, so now all we have to do, so we've got the broad, you know, body animation working. So now all we got to do is animate his face with keyframes and you know, let him do a little acting. So one thing you might do in this case, let's say you wanted more control over his head, okay? And we're going to ignore the fact that, turning onion skins off, by the way. So we're going to ignore the fact that in the real world, what would actually happen here is that probably we would have ink lines in the shot. And so I'm operating a little bit prematurely here, but let's just say what we're wanting to do is have a little more control over his head where we rotate it separately. There's more than one way we could do it. Okay. What I would do out of the gate, and let's go to another frame just so if I screw things up, I can just delete it. But what I'm going to do is hit Control and basically lasso everything that seems to be his head, mostly. and avoid grabbing anything that appears to be his clothing. Okay, so now if I hit the L key to select linked, boom, all the points that were linked become selected. Okay, so now I have an interesting choice. Choice number one is I could take these strokes and move them to another layer by hitting the M key. I could actually create a new layer and his head would be moved into the other layer like that, which means if I wanted to, I could then actually add an empty and then parent that layer to the empty, so that now if I want to, I can actually go into object mode and animate his head completely independent of everything else. Okay? I could do that. I don't actually think I want to do that. That's really not what I want to do. Okay, so I'm not going to move it into another layer. If you want to play it safe, what you can do in a case like this is hit Shift D and just make a... Sorry. Let me hit the O key to turn off proportional editing. Okay. This is something that is sort of non-intuitive. Most people probably wouldn't think of this like out of the gate, but think about this. I made a copy of the strokes that represent his head, and I just hit Shift D to make a duplicate, and then just moved it out of the way. So now if I screw something up, I've got a perfect copy of his head over there that I can always come back to if I need to, right? So this type of thing, you just kind of think about. It's not elegant, And by the way, talking about things in Blender 2.81 that are, amazing that are not present in 2.79, another one of them certainly would be, if you look at what you can do with the modifiers, like the lattices and things like that, it is awesome that you can attach a lattice to a grease pencil object in Blender 2.8 and forward, and then you can tell the lattice, I only want you to influence this layer of the grease pencil, or this vertex group. I mean, you can really dial in what you want it to have an effect on. That type of thing is really cool in Blender 2.8. The thing that's missing in Blender 2.8 in the modifiers that I really wish was there was the simple deformer that does the old venerable twist, taper, and bend. That would be really cool to have for the grease pencil. At this point, if you want to have that, what you have to do is render your grease pencil out and then bring it in like as images mapped to a mesh, so that you're actually able to apply the simple deformer to the mesh object. If that's what you have to do, then of course you can still do that in Blender 2.79 as well, right? I don't know if Blender 2.79, come to think of it, has the simple deformer with taper and twist. And Amar, do you know? I don't want to go looking for it right now. Do we have the simple deformer modifier in Blender 2.79? Let's find out. Let's find out because it's fun. Let's grab a mesh, and just for lack of a better idea, we'll pop up a torus on the screen, hit the tab key so we are in edit mode, S key to scale it down. Go over here, let's rotate it around a little bit just for awesome fun. We probably want it to rotate around its own center, so I hit the comma key, and now my question is, in my modifiers, Shift F7, do we have a simple deform? Oh, I bet we do. Where is it? Where is it? Deform. There it is. There it is. So if you want, even in Blender 2.79, if you want to be able to take a grease pencil animation you've done and then be able to apply these kinds of effects to it, like well, let's just say bend. It's the old effects we all remember from 3D Studio Max, isn't it? Twist. We need to have this on the correct axis. So maybe I'll show taper instead. Taper. Stretch is the one that's the killer feature for 2D animation. So I haven't fiddled around with this. It seems like it seems like the use of the simple deformer is a little more intuitive in Blender 2.8, if I remember correct. But judging from the fact that we have an axis origin we can create, it looks to me like all the features are there. You know, everything you would want to be able to use the simple deformer. Instant spaceship, right? Flying around the screen. Okay, so that was all very fun. But yeah, so we have the simple deformer, so that means you could use a simple deformer for squash and stretch on grease pencil animation. You just have to do it the hard way. Render out your grease pencil animation and then map it to a mesh. The salient point here is, guess what, friends? Bad news. You would have to do it the same exact way in Blender 2.8, and I'll bet you in version 3. Of course you can add an effect to a GP object. Wait, you're probably not talking to me. The proxy models were really effective in the Hero movie. Uh-huh. Yes. Yes. Unreal and Unity. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you want to talk about real time, you know, rendering and all the rest, you know, the Unreal Engine is pretty impressive. Okay, so we got this done, and we really don't need this copy of his head. What I meant to do, one of the great things, by the way, in Blender, and I don't know if this is true in 2.8, is typically Blender remembers what your last selection was. Now, in this case, it looks to me like I definitely made a bit of a mistake. I mean, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be inked anyway, but it looks like there are 2 instances of his face here from when I duplicated it. So that's my fault. That was kind of a stupid mistake. But that's all right. We're going to do it the same way. I'm just going to grab everything that seems to be part of his head and then hit the L key to select linked. And that means I can... let's do it this way. Actually, let's go back here. And then what I'll do is I'll do a rotate. And then smack this back here, duplicate it, and then here I'm going to do a squash and stretch. Okay? So, how do you do that? Well, what I'm going to do, there's more than one way to do it. You could do it with sculpting. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab the top and the bottom of his face, and then I'm going to go O key for proportional editing, which is basically, you'll see what that is. And then I'm going to go SZ, which means I'm stretching on the Z axis. Okay? SZ, and then I'm hitting shift. And now I want to dial in the influence of it because I really don't want it affecting his body so much. And there it is. So now let's see what we have. And by the way, it probably would behoove us to get rid of that. And of course it's baked into this other keyframe as well. Oops. So let's get rid of it. So you guys thought I was lying when I told you I've been using Blender for 20 years. Boom. Okay. Did that work? You know, I mean, I don't think it worked. I would say no. If you're going to do the squash and stretch thing, frankly, it probably would make more sense for it to be here. Let's go ahead and add a key here. So there he's going down, he's going up. You know, you could use a sculpt tool to add some squash and stretch for sure, but I don't know. I think I'm going to keep it simple. It's really the facial animation I want to be concerned about here. So, what I'm wanting to do, and by the way, what did I just change? The pivot point. What the heck was the default there? I wonder if undo will fix that. Nope. Amar, you're paying attention. Did you notice what I had this set to? I don't remember. Anyway. Okay. So this we do not need. A key. So I'm going to go. I am going to draw, hit the D key. I want to just, then now we're in the mode of just keeping it loose. We're in pencil test mode. And probably we could maybe animate these by hitting the G, whoops. Well, actually that kind of works. I'm kind of liking that, as a matter of fact. I'm going to move up a little bit and then rotate a little bit. Rotate a little bit, up a little bit. Okay, now let's go back to sculpting. F key, let's make the influence pretty big. So E key. Let's see what's... Okay, so now this happens way too soon, obviously. Hey, I know. Okay, so now I think I want this to probably be about 50 or 60 frames is what we're going to wind up needing. File, save. Discord, yeah. It should be in the. Sorry, Reba, I wasn't paying attention, but it should be in the description for this video. There should be a link to my Discord, which is like a permanent invite that you can click, and that will let you get invited into the Discord. So, okay. Back to work, my friends. We have work to do. Okay, I like this. I like the acting. Hey, I know. We could call him Monkey. Okay, so I'm basically still laying the groundwork for kind of the beginning of the show to a degree. So I'm thinking about the acting here, just animating straight ahead. Probably this is where getting into some layers would probably make more sense. So I'm going to change this to Shift F5 so we can actually see. Let's just get. I'm just going to put a mouth layer, because let's face it. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of mouth shapes. And I really don't want to have, the use case is this. Let's say I get him to this point and then I add a bunch of lip sync, okay? And then I realize that there's something about his head or his eyes or something that I need to change in the underlying drawing. Well, the problem is, if I do it in the same layer, then the error that I need to correct is baked into each of those individual frames. Okay? So once you hit a part in your workflow where you detect that risk, then it makes more sense to go ahead and jump to another layer. So for me, in this case, I'm going to say, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to hit the D key and then I'm going to erase his mouth here. Actually, strike that. You know what? I'll show you the better way to do this. The better way to do what I just said. So I'm going to actually hit undo a couple times. And then I'm going to remove this mouth layer. What you actually should do is select the points and then hit the M key and let Blender just create a new layer. There you go. M key to move those strokes into another layer. So now the mouth is in its own layer. Perfect. And now we can move forward, and then this underlying drawing will just prevail underneath the lip sync, right? That's what we wanted. So the problem with that approach is what we see here, where we can still see the mouth earlier in the shot, and what we would have to do to remedy that would be to simply go to this keyframe. Normally the way I would do it is I would actually hit the G key and wiggle it, because what I'm wanting to do is create a keyframe, and then I would just delete the strokes. If you don't wiggle it and create a keyframe by moving something, so Blender says, oh, you're wanting to animate, right? If you don't do that, then if you deleted the strokes, you would actually be deleting them from this frame, which is not what you wanted to do. Okay? Making sense, people? So Luka says, hey. And now, if we are in... okay, for me, I believe I set up the hotkey in Blender. Yes. If I hit the star key, it toggles between isolating the current layer or not. So by hitting the star key, what that means is I can now sculpt, because it's my choice. If I wanted to, I could use the sculpt tools or edit or whatever, and I can edit all these layers in tandem together. But in this case, I don't want to. What I want to do is edit his mouth, and when I start dragging points around, I don't want the points in the underlying body to be manipulated at all. So I'm going to hit the star key, which effectively locks that layer. Now, I can go, well, I mean, let's use sculpting. Why not? So I'll hit the E key, and what I'm wanting to do is just create a second mouth keyframe. Opening his mouth up. You could use the scaling tool to accomplish the same thing, obviously. Alright, we're going to do this anime style, which means we're going to put in 2 cycles of those mouth shapes, and then I'm going to go scale on the Z. And the fact that I'm doing this with sculpting tools is pretty much stupid, really. I mean, let's be honest. It would make more sense to just draw the mouth shape, right? But that's okay. We're having fun. Okay, so, hey, I know. All right. I don't like the fact that it stays in edit mode, and that mouth looks pretty stupid, doesn't it? We are going to do what I just said. We are going to erase. Okay, let me go here. Oops. Okay. So, I just want to get it in there. I don't really like that, though. I feel like I want it to be just a little bit lower on his face. Whoops. 1 key. 9 key to flip the screen. Hello. Okay. And you can definitely see some slight imbalances. But as a righty, as opposed to a lefty, I find it a little easier to have flipped the screen. So there we go. Okay. Blifton, Riva is not. Okay, Dave could add the Discord link to the stream description of the chat. Do you need it? I'm on both. Yeah, Reba was asking. Yep. Hey, Nuisance. Nuisance Productions. I like Nuisance Productions' work. I remember he's had some... I assume it, Nuisance is a he. I don't know if it's a he, but I'm assuming. He's had some cool stuff here on YouTube for quite a long time, actually. You're kind of one of the old timers with open tunes, aren't you? Nuisance Productions. Seems to me, if I'm remembering. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. But. Okay, turn the onion skins back off. Hey, I know. Hi. Okay, come on. I know. Okay. Here's what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and select all. Oops. Didn't mean to put those keys in there for the hat. That was a bad idea, but that's all right. We'll just select these guys and delete them so that his mouth is erased. Now, what I'm wanting to do here is let's go back here, and unlike Blender 2.81, in 2.81, if I'm in isolation mode or auto lock inactive layers, then just by clicking a different layer, that layer would become active and the others would be unlocked. Not true in Blender 2.79. In 2.79, I need to go star, star. I need to actually hit star twice. Well, actually 3 times. It turned them all off, then it... Let me see, what did it do? I grabbed this, and then star turns that one off that was currently on, and then turns them both on, and then isolates the one that I selected this time. So, 1, 2, 3. So you got to hit star 3 times to switch what layer is being isolated in Blender 2.79. Okay, so what I wanted to do was, hey, I know. We'll call him Monkey. I wonder. Okay. What I'm feeling here is probably, let's add this. Let's put a tween here. Do we want a sculpt or edit mode? I actually tend to favor proportional editing mode personally. But that's me. I guess in this case I better sculpt because I feel like I don't have quite enough control. And of course this is a pencil test, so this is really ultimately just a guide for the real or for the ink work, right? So I can have little mistakes here that will wind up being corrected at the ink stage for sure. Okay, and I suppose since we're here, we might want to erase the mouth, right? Now we don't have to. I mean, we don't have to put the mouth in a separate layer. Okay, what did I do? How did I inadvertently erased. And I guess I don't need to have the mouth isolated at this point, so. Okay. And then he's going to say, we could call him Monkey. So this is it's kind of one of the little jokes, I guess you'd say, in the show, is that the monkey's name is actually Monkey. Okay, so now what we would have to do is right here, we would have to make a duplicate of that keyframe so that we can select all. Whoops, that's not what we wanted to do. Let's hit the star key to isolate. Now we hit select all, and then we can rotate this. And now we want to scale on the Z. And I'm just doing this with scaling for no particular reason because it would probably be a lot easier to just redraw it. And so we'll hit the A key, and I suppose we will hit the E key to do a little fun sculpting. Okay, so that's that, and we've got plenty of frames. Hey, I know. Let's call him Monkey. Perfect. I mean, maybe perfect might be a strong word. There's a little bit of imbalance in his eyes that's a little problematic, but basically the shot looks pretty good. It's what I was after. I mean, it's what I was trying to accomplish. Now, what about right here? I'm going to add another layer, actually. We're going to call this hand. And then, let's see here. The sketch layer, I'm going to say, we're going to ignore the fact that the sketch layer pretty much needs modification here, because what we want to do is I'm going to actually turn the sketch layer down, make it lighter. So I can really see what I'm doing on the hand layer. Okay, so the idea here is that I just want to get a sketch like that. Okay. Okay, and now I want to actually, I don't want additive drawing, so that's good. This is not checked, and that's what we want. That way, when I go to another frame and start drawing, the grease pencil strokes disappear. So I'm not trying to add more stuff to the existing drawing. I'm trying to just create a clean one. So here we're just going to keep this really rough, and then okay, this is actually why I isolate layers, because what just happened was when I erased, because the other layers weren't locked, the other layers just got keyframes inserted into them, and I definitely do not want that. So we'll get rid of that one. So hence it tends to be good practice to have the layers that aren't the current active one, have them locked. Otherwise it's kind of easy to accidentally start inserting a billion keyframes that you didn't intend. Pretty common problem. Okay, and now we don't really have a lot of time here to you know, for him to be moving around the screen, so let's just go ahead and make this jump pretty abrupt. And basically his hand should actually be, we should be seeing the back of his hand, and then his thumb's kind of sticking back that way. So we'll just draw this a little bit cartoony, get the motion basically happening the way we expect, and then we'll deal with. Now this is a great example of, again, where the editing is cool. So I'm going to hit A, and I'm actually going to just hit the S key and shrink it a bit. I just feel like I drew his hand too large, really. And you know, we can kind of manipulate it a little bit. Hitting the A key. Alright, and now here, do we want to go even further? Maybe. Okay, and let's turn off proportional editing. So we just kind of get the basic movement blocked in. So I'm anchoring on the wrist area. Okay, D key. And then here, I want to hit the D key and just put in a blank keyframe. Okay, cool beans. Sketch, we can turn back up. Hey, I know. We can call him Monkey. Not bad. Not bad. Not necessarily award-winning, but and by the way, to be clear, I'm deliberately using anime style lip sync, where we have open mouth, more open mouth, more open mouth, more open mouth, almost closed mouth. That's a mouth shape pattern that allows you to translate into all different languages, and the dialogue still works. So, hence, I'm not dealing with phonemes. Just so you know, I do know how to use phonemes. But this show, it's assumed that this is going to be translated. Okay. B key, or I'm sorry, D key here. in the hand layer. I want to get this contour of his arm. I think I like that. Okay, I think that's it. All right, BlendedPlanet, the Discord link is not in your description. Okay, well if that's true, it's because YouTube is acting totally stupid today, and it doesn't surprise me. Bear with me for just a second. I want to look at something. If you look at if you look at my YouTube channel, you look at any of the recent videos in the Animation Truman Show playlist, they have the link. They all have the Discord link. But let me look at the description here. Yeah, this is, I tell you, YouTube. Hang on a second. Let it not be said that Google has the market cornered on not being complete stupid, because YouTube makes some very, very funky decisions about what you intend in terms of setting up live streams and stuff. So let me just, on another screen, I'm going to turn that down. And hang on a second. Control C. Control V. Okay, refresh the live stream. Blifton, and see if the description has updated. I pasted the correct description into it. Okay. That's what I was asking him to do, or add it to the chat. 1, 2, 3, it is elementary. Nuisance, had a feeling since I'm on long hiatus that I could take the time to sit down and actually check in. I appreciate that. You are a he. You don't use OpenTunes well. Like I said, I seem to remember you had some pretty cool stuff. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. I don't know. I will state this again. Thank you, Amar, since you missed it. It looks like you had it set to 3D cursor, and now you have it set to active element. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I apologize for here you are helping me, and I'm ignoring you, so I apologize for that. That's me being a stupid pants. Okay, save. Let me run the animation one. Hey, I know. You call him Monkey. Not bad. Okay, so now let's think strategy. If we're going to do ink on this thing, what we're going to wind up doing is taking these 3 layers and just turning them all down. We're going to turn them all down like that. Okay? And then what the idea is going to be is to go ahead and create the ink, and probably, other than the lip sync, and then when the hand comes in, basically up to this point, it's one drawing. It's all just one drawing, because when we do the ink, we'll go ahead and sculpt it the same way we did the pencil test. So, with that, I don't think I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I've been going for 2 hours, and frankly, I have some web development for some commercial clients I need to get to. I'm neglecting my commercial clients. And since they pay the bills, well, we kind of have to get their work done. So, with that in mind, I'm going to hit the star key 3 times so that I've isolated the ink level. And just so you know, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to switch to this brush here, which is super smooth ink. Okay, now when I'm not drawing, I can actually toggle between those grease pencil brushes with my 1, 2, and 3 key. So super smooth ink using the ink color means I can zoom way in here. And then I can hit the D key and do a fairly rough job here on this. And it doesn't matter because I'm going to hit the E key and just dial it in. I may wind up actually using smoothing on there too. But the idea here is going to be to go ahead and create the ink in Blender 2.79. And then what we'll do is we'll export the rendered frames. Once the animation's all looking good and we like the line work, we'll export the rendered frames into the folder that will allow us to go ahead and take those rendered frames and insert them into the show. So we'll be able to see how it feels cut in with the rest of the show. Then what we'll do is we'll go into Krita and we'll import those animated frames into Krita and do all of our paint work and add the background and everything like that. And then we'll simply re-render, because remember, when you import stuff into Krita, it gets stored in the Krita file. It doesn't continue to reference the images that are on the hard drive. So that means that we can do our work in Krita and then just render over top of the same frames we're going to render out of Blender. So we'll do the color in Krita and just render them out. And of course, anything else that comes up along the way. Makes sense. So I'm using this particular brush because I like the what I call the Alex Toth look. It's a fairly uniform brush width. Very simple. It's a very simple brush. And again, I can hit the E key to just dial that in. There's a case to be made, by the way, for actually not baking his eyes into the drawing. Because what about blinks? Well, I have an answer for that. And I'm just going to grab this and go Shift D. Then I'm going to go Scale X -1. Okay, whoops. I probably should hit the, is it the comma? I always forget. Scale X -1. There we go. SX -1. That scales it on the x-axis, essentially reversing it, and now we have instantly created another eyebrow that's exactly the same as the other. Okay, so that's what we'll do. We'll get this thing inked, and then we'll turn off the pencil test layers, make sure we're happy with what we're seeing. You know, and generally make sure that there aren't any obvious leaks. If there are leaks, we have ways to deal with that, obviously, in Krita, but if we can be leak-free, that's generally preferred. So, as you can see, this is a pretty fluid, quick process. And unbelievably, I have, other than the lip sync, I have a serious proportion of the ink done. Because this is just going to be sculpted, you know. This shot right here will be sculpted to match the pencil test, and that's not going to be hard to do. So we'll sculpt it, and then we just have to draw the hand. We just have to ink the hand. Easy peasy. Excellent. Thank you. Sorry about the confusion on the description. Well, what happened was I clicked live stream, and instead of popping up the dialog that says reuse previous settings, where you can select from any of your recent live streams to reuse the settings and then usually just like change the thumbnail or whatever, last night it just went live. So I'm like, oh man. And the YouTube, in their infinite wisdom, well, I commented the other day that if you take an offline YouTube video, so you do a live stream, and then you go into your video, into your editing in your channel or whatever, and you change the listing of the video to unlisted. Okay, YouTube makes the jump to assume that the next time you live stream, you actually want the live stream to be unlisted, which is stupid. Like, when would you ever want that? There might be a case where you would, but basically that's not normally what somebody would want. So they're making all these assumptions. Yet, in the instance yesterday, where it just went ahead and went live without giving me the opportunity to tweak the settings, you would ask yourself, well, okay, so what are the default settings that YouTube would assign in this scenario? And what it did was it chose a description from like a month ago, like a really outdated description that I haven't used in a while. So how did it decide that that was the right choice? I have no idea. Not a clue. Not a clue, friends. Seems kind of stupid to me. But there it is. That's what YouTube did. So, important things to note, guys. What if you wanted to save a little time on the coloring side of things? Could you? Well, it turns out you could. For example, what if I said, look, I don't need to color his eyebrows in Krita. I already know what color they're going to be because Luka's eyebrow color is well established. Okay? So, what is the hotkey? I got to remember the hotkey. Is it Control M for me? Yes. Okay, so that's a hotkey I set up in Blender 2.79. But what it does is I hit Control M. Like the M key moves the strokes into a different layer or even creates a new layer for you. Control M takes the current strokes and reassigns them to a different material. So in this case, where will this maybe fall apart? Well, it's going to fall apart here. If I hit the L key and change these strokes to a filled color, Control M. See what happens? Because we don't actually have a stroke going across here, it doesn't create a closed shape. Now we can kind of mitigate that actually. We can mitigate that this way. We can select just these points off his head and then go Control M. Uh-oh, that was not what was supposed to happen. So I think if I'm going to do that strategy, I would have to grab these points and probably separate them. And what is that? Is that Control? Darn it, I don't remember the hotkey in Blender 2.79 for that. Alt-P? I thought it was the P key. Darn it. Well, what I can do, maybe I can go Control X, Control V. Nope, that doesn't work either. So, I can't remember what to separate. Amar, do you remember? What's the hotkey to take those points and separate them from the stroke they're currently associated with? G pencil. Where the heck is it? Move to color is what I did. Subdivide, delete. No, we don't want dissolve. So unfortunately, select. Linked. That's kind of weird. I know I actually have a blog entry on my website where I documented all the hotkeys and stuff from in the Blender 2.79 grease pencil. I'm pretty sure there's the join. But where's the separate? Oh well, doesn't matter. It's going to take less than 1 second to fill that anyway. So anyway, that was just to demonstrate that if you really wanted to bake a certain amount of color into the ink work, you certainly have that option to do. So with that, I'm starting to run out of gas, so I think I'm going to quit. And you guys use P. It's just P? Let me just use P. P. Now I hit go, and they still seem to be attached. Proportional editing is not turned on, so that's not throwing us off kilter. It doesn't seem to be P. I thought it was P as well. Wait. Copy, paste, then delete the other? Yeah, you could. That's true. If you went... See, the problem in this case is how do you get it back to its original position? Yeah, it's a little clunky because you kind of have to move out of the way in order to select the... We're tinkling in the wind right now. This is just probably a waste of time for no good reason. So what's ultimately going to wind up getting exported is this. This is what will come into Krita, and we'll color it. And as I said, click, done. The painting's done. So, we don't really need to belabor it here. So with that, I am going to quit. It is almost 2.5 hours. And thanks for being here. As you guys know, there will be more later.